Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this Business Over Breakfast. The past couple of years has been a real wake-up call for us in many ways, especially for businesses. Rapid pivoting of business operations and exponential increases of digital business models has everyone's head spinning. And I meet very few people these days who don't tell me they're all working sort of crazy busy or something similar to that. If the pandemic taught us nothing, it's that culture of ongoing innovation and experimentation is absolutely crucial to remaining relevant. And yesterday's playbooks can't be relied on anymore. The changing technologies, changing expectations of customers, of employees, of our communities, just offer both opportunities, if we're looking on the positive side of it, but also threats that keep us working really hard. It's my pleasure today to welcome back Scott Sanchez to guide us through a conversation about innovation and how to leverage that within our organizations and within how we work. Scott is a human-driven product innovation leader with expertise in innovation, product management, design, and a history of turning deep human insights into simple yet impactful products and experiences that delight customers. He's brought a customer-driven approach to innovation to organizations of all sizes across many industries to help invent and reinvent products and experiences for sustainable growth. Among other things, Scott is passionate about putting the user at the center of innovation and experimentation, because doing so aligns resources, effort, and investment to meet their needs. In addition to his work at Emory with graduate students and corporate clients, Scott brings his expertise to Emory Executive Education and courses like Design Thinking coming up next week, as well as Disrupting Your Business Strategy in November. So you can learn more about these on our website. Scott's going to spend about 30-35 minutes exploring how we might place the user at the center of our innovation work. And then we'll follow that with Q&A. So as per usual, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to handle them all. Enjoy your time with Scott, as I am going to do, and learn a lot. Scott, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicola. Pleasure to be with you and with Emory and with everyone here today. I'm really excited to talk about innovation, but a really interesting aspect of innovation. But let me sort of get a few logistics out of the way. First, the question I wonder about a lot is, can you actually get better innovations if you spend less time on the innovation itself? And it's a little counterintuitive, but that's what we're going to explore today. And that's the question I have for us as we think about it. Can you actually do better at the innovation by spending less time on the thing itself? Can you innovate the who and the what in addition to the how? We'll talk about all of that. A few logistical things. We're going to use a couple different tools today. We're going to use Zoom. I'm going to be watching Zoom chat. So please, as you go, make comments. I'm going to have a few audience participation places along the way, so be ready for that. And then as you have questions that you want answered, use the Zoom Q&A functionality. And I'll try to hit a few things as we go, but especially when we get some time after the 30 minutes of content. The other tool we're going to use is something called Mentimeter. And many of you may have used this, but in a second, I'm going to show you a URL you can go to. And I'm going to ask a few questions along the way. And I would really appreciate the participation. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know where your head is as we think about going through this exercise together. All right. So that's the setup. Let's jump into it. Here we go. All right. So Menti. So you can either using your smartphone. It appears chat is disabled. Thank you for saying that. Maybe Pam or Justin, if you guys could look into that and see, and let me know if that's something we can enable, if you will, or not. So regardless of if we get chat working, Thank you for that, by the way. Regardless of how we get chat working, I want to use Menti to help. So on any browser, it can be your smartphone, it can be a tablet, it can be the browser you have, so you can sort of see the slides as well. Either go to menti.com and enter the 55126088 code, or scan the QR code with your tablet or phone, and it should take you there. So I'll leave this up for just a second, and then it'll actually go through the exercise with us and ask some questions. All right. So that's what we're going to do as we go through this. So I'm leaving this up just for another second or so, and then we're going to jump into it. And we're going to do our first Menti question on the next slide. So here we go. So do you think you can actually get better innovations if you spend less time on the innovation itself? Without getting into any of the content, where's your head? What are you thinking? Right? I would love, great, awesome, love it. I love that you guys are already jumping in. I think that's great. I think it's a really interesting question, and we're going to walk through it together. So as you all keep contributing, we've got another few seconds as we think about this. So if I look at this, right, there's some people who are like, absolutely, right? And then there's some people who are unsure, right? And then a few other is, Scott, what are you asking me? Is this a trick question? Awesome. It looks like chat is working to me, by the way. So we'll use chat as we go, but keep using Menti as well. Awesome, thank you. So, and then for folks who are putting it in chat, also, if you can, use Menti, and we'll sort of navigate all of this together. By the way, I should say as we get into this, consistent with innovation, there are a few things I'm prototyping during this. So bear with me as we figure out some of the technical challenges as we go. I'm prototyping Menti, I'm prototyping how I'm sharing. So think about it. I tend to innovate on lots of things. Awesome. So, the question I'll get to in a second on the working definition of innovation. Give me a second. All right, so that's the first question. Let's do the second question. So this is a little bit different, which is, let's say you have 100 points. Where should you allocate those 100 points? What time and effort should you do? What percentage should you spend in the who? What percentage should you spend in the what? What percentage in the how? Think of the who as understanding and articulating that user or customer or prospect. Think of the what as defining the need or problem that you've got to solve. And think of the how as the actual solution to that problem. Awesome. So I'll be interested to see how this sort of develops along the way. Where are people? What are you thinking? And hopefully it makes sense to add the +10s and whatnot. This is great. So thank you. Oh, this is really interesting. At least initially, there's more who than what or how. Great. Fascinated to see how's trying to make a comeback. Hopefully you guys can all see the movement that we go. So keep going for another 30 seconds or so. You know, it's interesting, and we'll get into this a little bit. All of these are important. I think the question is where do you really spend your time and how do you allocate your time along the way? I will tell you, I love the set, and keep going as we go through this. I will tell you what I've seen at most organizations that I've worked with or that I've consulted with is, as much as they say they want to do more on the who and the what, they actually spend the vast majority of the time and the effort on the how. Now, in some cases, a long manufacturing process or a long software development process, I get that in many ways. But what we're going to really talk about today is how does that who and the what play a really critical role in this. All right, great. And Denise, you're absolutely right. The who and the what help on the how, and that's the connection we're going to make even more today. Awesome. Here we go. So innovation is absolutely critical. Nicola said it, like what got you here won't get you there. We got to skate to where the puck's going to be and not where it is. Like there are all these wonderful, amazing phrases around innovation. We know it's key. The number of companies who are adding innovation to everything they do is really critical in this whole thing. A couple of people ask about what's a good definition of innovation. Great question. Some people think innovation is using brand new technology. Some people think innovation is doing something that competitors have never done before. I will tell you my definition at Deluxe, which is where I'm the product innovation officer. We're a 105-year-old company that's reinventing ourselves from a check company. And if you get your checks from Deluxe, we appreciate that. But to a checks company, to a fintech and a payments company where checks is just one form of payment. Our definition of innovation at Deluxe is delight businesses in solving their needs so they thrive and succeed. The thrive and succeed ties to our mission and what businesses want. That based on their needs is what I would tell you. My definition of innovation is always going to go back to the customer and what are their problems or their needs that need to be solved. Sometimes they can articulate those needs and sometimes they can't. It's your job as an innovator to figure those things out. And then delight businesses is the first part of that. We serve small businesses and large businesses, but we don't just want to have them check the box on a feature. We want to delight them and create an emotional connection on that. So that's the way I think about what innovation is along the way. Innovation is key. Now, I believe innovation can be a process. And the process that I am a big fan of is design thinking. And this really isn't going to be a big design thinking sort of exercise, but let me sort of bring it to life for you a little bit in a story. Let me tell you a story about a group of Stanford students who used design thinking and innovated. And we're going to use that to give us some good language on the who, the what, and the how. So at Stanford, there is a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. And Design for Extreme Affordability is all about how do we solve really wicked problems in developing countries, not developed countries, but in developing countries where you don't have the money and the resources and the technology and all the things you've got today. And so in that class at Stanford, they partner with NGOs or non-governmental organizations to actually figure out, right, how you attack these problems. And these NGOs bring problems to Stanford. You create a small student team to go after that, solve this problem. And that's what this story is about. So let me tell you a story about Jane. Jane was a Stanford student. She took classes at the D School at Stanford where we teach design thinking, and she took Design for Extreme Affordability along the way. And the NGO that came to her said, we really want you to work on the problem of infant mortality in developing countries. So you may or may not be familiar with this. In the US, our infant mortality rate is about 5 deaths per 1,000 live births. In India, it's 27 deaths, so more than 5 times. And especially when you get outside of the cities in India, it's even more. So that was the challenge that this student team attacked. And the ask of them was to design a cheaper incubator. All right, so here's a little Zoom chat, audience participation. What is the purpose of an incubator? Anybody know? I'm watching chat. I think we've got it working. What's the purpose of an incubator? Protection, awesome. Prolong life, good. Mimic the uterus, I saw that in Q&A. Keep the infant alive outside, keep the baby warm. You guys on it, right, absolutely. Technically, keep baby warm is really what most people think of. Technically, it's about regulating the baby's temperature, as someone said, sort of mimicking the uterus, because babies can't regulate, especially premature and low birth weight babies, can't regulate their temperature. So the incubator is designed to do that. So the beauty of the incubator is it works really well. The challenge of the incubator is they're really expensive. These things cost about $20,000. Interestingly enough, they break a lot and they're really expensive to fix. And in these developing countries, you don't have that. So the challenge to the student team was we want you to redesign an incubator at a cost of, so that we could buy it at a cost of $200, not $20,000, right? $200 versus $20,000, order of magnitude difference. And that's what the challenge was. And as they started to understand and talk to people about this incubator, they started to realize, man, everybody said this. They're expensive. They're too expensive to fix. I think someone said it. You can't get the parts, Donna, right? All of those things are absolutely true in developing countries. So consistent with design thinking, right? They actually prototyped this. Now, not a real baby, right? Just to be clear, that's a doll, right? But they prototyped this, and you started to see they took a Walmart plastic tub, they took some construction paper and a koozie to pretend of where you stick your hands in, kind of thing, and they started to create a prototype around this. Well, that's great and all. And then they actually went to Nepal in India, and they visited clinics and doctors there. So this team of 5 or 6 students went there. They were excited to sort of see if their prototype could work. Again, they're not going to test with real babies yet. We'll worry about that later. But just understanding and gaining empathy excuse me, understanding and gaining empathy for the situation and the user. And what they heard confirmed what they thought, right? Doctor said, this is a problem. They're too expensive, right? They break all the time. The nurses that they talked to said the same things. But then the students started to look around, and they visited multiple clinics, and they saw incubators, right, around these clinics in the cities. The incubators were working, but they were empty. And when they started to ask these questions about why, they said, oh, it's just unique. This isn't the real situation. Normally, blah, 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 all of those things. And they kept seeing this pattern. And that's when they did something really magical. They got on a bus and they went to remote villages, 2 and 3 hours outside the city. And that's where they stumbled on their big insight. 80% of premature and low birth weight babies are born hours away from the hospital. And they realized in that moment that the challenge was not, how do you keep them warm at the hospital? The trick was, how do you keep them warm on the way to the hospital so they have a chance at survival? So then what they ended up doing is they realized that the real user wasn't the doctor or the clinic. The real user was these moms or dads or families in these remote villages who didn't have the ability to take care of these premature and low birth weight babies. And the problem became about keeping the baby warm or regulating the temperature when there wasn't an incubator around, and probably couldn't be. So they did more prototyping, right? Again, not a real baby. And they came up with this phase change material from NASA, this gel wrap that you can heat thousands of times. Most material, when you heat it, it immediately gets cooler. With this gel wrap, you heat it and it stays constant longer. They put that in and they basically turned it into a baby sleeping bag. Long story short, they created a business and a product called Embrace. And you can go to embraceglobal.org if you're interested, right? But the idea is it's a baby sleeping bag to keep the baby warm. They can produce these, by the way, for less than $200. So how did they think about this? The first big thing that they had to realize is their who they were solving for originally was those doctors in the clinics. They had to reframe the who to these new moms with premature babies in the villages. They also had to reframe the what or the need. It wasn't about keeping the baby warm at the hospital, though every expert they talked to said that was the problem. It turns out it was about keeping them warm or regulating their temperature in these remote villages on the way to the hospital. So they had to reframe the what as well. And that really resulted in a very different how. And that's what I think is so interesting as we think about the story. It was the right solution for the right problem, neither of which were known at the beginning of the project. So how did they do it? Empathy, right? They gained empathy. They went to Nepal. They watched people. They talked to people. They understood. They talked to lots of different people. They asked lots of questions. They defined the need. They didn't get to keep babies warm on the way to the hospital until multiple iterations along the way. They brainstormed. I didn't show you any of those pictures, but lots of Post-it notes. They prototyped. I showed you those prototypes, what we call low fidelity prototypes, right? Cheap, low cost prototypes. They tested those prototypes to see what would work, and they iterated over and over and over again. And so to tie design thinking back to our who, what, and how, what I hope you take away from these first few minutes is the how is really important to innovate. Don't get me wrong. But the who and the what is nearly as important. That informs the how. I'll come back to the why. I think someone asked that a little bit. I'll come back to the why in a second. But I think a lot when I think about innovation is that alignment of who, what, and how. And if we were to just really simplify it, you've probably heard the terms product market fit, right? The way I think about product market fit, the way we think about product market fit at Deluxe is the alignment between who you're solving for, what their needs are, and how you solve them. That's what we're really going for as we think about that. So that's the language we'll use as we go through the next few minutes. Okay, so if we go back to Embrace, you get it, you get the idea. The who was new moms with premature babies in villages, the what was keep them warm in the remote villages, and the how was a sleeping bag with a phase change material to maintain a constant temperature. That's the product market fit they had originally. It wasn't the one that's the product market fit they iterated to. It wasn't the one they had originally. Okay, so if that's our construct for what we're gonna do, let me zoom in just a little bit on the what, because the what tends to be the place where most people struggle with the most. You know, you sort of know who your target customer is, and then you spend a lot of time on the how. Let's talk about the what. All the what is a concise statement of the need or the problem grounded in user insights. The what is not a how. All right. And when I say it's not a how, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to define that need or problem in a solution agnostic way. In other words, there could be lots of hows that could solve it. All right, so here comes an important audience participation. Get ready for Zoom chat. I'm going to show you a picture, and what I want you to tell me is what's the what for this user? What does this user need? All right, you ready? Here we go. What does she need? What do you think? What does this girl need? A ladder, great. A ladder, lots of ladders. What else does she need? Something to reach with, Jay, awesome. A book, right? A Kindle, all right, from the top shelf, help. Jacqueline, great. She needs help. Now, let me tell you the story of her. Dan, you got it. She's working on a book report for the Vietnam War, right? So what does she need? What's her what? Information. Now, next audience participation, what are the hows that could give her knowledge or information about the Vietnam War? What do you think? A book? A ladder to get the book? Absolutely. What are other hows that could solve her need for knowledge? Internet? Awesome. Interview with a vet, Dan. Absolutely. A teacher? Interviews. You got it. That's the difference between the what and the how. And I will tell you, the what is super hard because we are humans and we think in solutions. What we've got to do is train our brain to say, why is that a solution? What does she need? Help me understand the context. And that's the what. All right. So now, who, what, and how. So now we're going to do one more case study as we get into this a little bit deeper. All right. The segue. Segue, fascinating piece of technology, right? Amazing. First question, we're back to Minty. Have you actually ever ridden a Segway? One of these old original Segways, right? What else? No. All right, go ahead and put it in Minty if you can. And hopefully your Minty's following along. No, and never. Right, I totally hear you. I'd love to try. Awesome, Lily, Desian, right? No. Hey, yes. And I'll never get on one again. Hilarious. Oh my gosh, someone has one. Oh, we just have to talk about that. Awesome. So I was fascinated to understand this. Great work, y'all. So that gives us an idea of sort of familiarity with it. Let me sort of tell you the story of the Segway, and we're going to use our who, what, how to unpack it a little bit. So when the original Segway came out in 2001, its goal was to redefine public transit. Make sure you wear a helmet. I love it. Fun, I love it. Right? But it was going to redefine everything around transit. Right? It was going to be to the car what the car was to the horse, right? These are the big things that were being said about it by Dean Kamen, who was an amazing inventor. By the way, this is an amazing piece of technology. I've ridden it. I actually would ride it again. It takes a little getting used to, and I agree with Gary, you got to wear a helmet without a doubt. But it's an amazing piece of technology, and Dean Kamen, an amazing inventor. And he had really wide aspirations. He filed the first patent for it in 1994, and they actually launched it in December of 2001 on Good Morning America with early unit shipping in 2002. And he thought it was going to change everything. And not only him, some luminaries of our times thought this was going to change everything, right? And so what was really fascinating is Steve Jobs said cities will be rebuilt around this. Jeff Bezos said, I'm not worried about the product. You're going to have no problem selling it. And John Doerr, who invested in both of their companies, funnily enough, right? It's going to be as important as the internet. Luminaries of our time said this was going to be absolutely amazing. It was going to change everything. And it worked really well. They invested $80 million of it. Their business case that they put together, right? They were going to sell 40,000 a month at $5,000 each and recoup that relatively quickly, right? So it was a really fascinating experience that they did. So let's go back to our who, what, how, right? And let's sort of come up with a who, what, how for the Segway. A little easier to do revisionist history. So I'm acknowledging of that without a doubt. But the who, if you were to talk to them, is it was everyone who needs to travel short distances. The what was it's helped people get around better than walking or driving. And the how was this amazing two-wheeled self-balancing personal transporter. I think in the chat, several folks said there were challenges with it, without a doubt, and they kept trying to improve that, right? But this self-balancing two-wheeled is what Dean really anchored on, and that's what he ended up building. So, and it was, pictures of it were everywhere, right? Good Morning America, right? We all know how electric scooters have done in cities these days. We'll come back to that story in a second. But the idea that was this was going to change everything. So back to our business case. How did it do? Well, in its first 2 years, it sold a whopping 6,000 units, right? Not very well at all. Now, over the course of its life, it found some other markets which we're going to talk about, but it was largely a huge flop at the beginning, and it never really realized its potential to redesign everything around public transportation. So let's see if we can use the who, what, how to understand why. So if this was the who, what, how that I just showed you a few minutes ago, everyone who needs to travel short distances, help people get around better than walking or driving, right? And a two-wheeled self-balancing personal transporter. Give me some reasons. Why do you think it went wrong in chat? Why are some reasons that it actually went wrong? What do you think? RJ, we'll come back to that. Cost, right? $5,000, dangerous. Actually, their marketing was quite good, I would argue, but they didn't quite connect. Pricing, yeah, you know, I will tell you, when I went back and researched this a lot and interviewed some people, the $5,000 was a problem, and they started to discount it a little bit and lower the price to some degree. But interesting enough, I don't think that was the biggest problem around. You know, Melody, I think the not a fit for all areas, that's good. Not convenient. Where do you park it? Awesome, really good. So let me tell you the way I think about it. And no doubt safety and wear helmet and all of those things. Look, lots of reasons. If I think about it from an innovation perspective, you know, I often think about where do things actually get adopted? If your goal was to solve for everyone, right? And it was to help everyone, where did you see adoption? Well, there were two areas where you actually saw adoption. RJ already hit one, right? Mall Cop. There was a movie made about it, right? It got adoption there. Anybody know the other area it got really adopted? Where did it get adopted? Anyone know the other area? Airports? Airports, I think fair enough. Tourists, Zahir. Yes, tourists. The two big places it got adopted were areas to secure, right? So airports are, you know, are those types of large areas, and city immersion, right? Park tours, Lauren, absolutely. Those are the two places that really got adopted. So if we were to do a who, what, how, if you will, on those two areas, there were two different who, what, hows. One was the security patrol people, that's the who. The what was, right, help them secure a large area that's too big to walk on a regular basis. And the how was a two-wheeled self-balancing personal transport. That was product market fit. Now, I will tell you, I don't know that you invest $80 million in a self-balancing personal transporter for that, but that's probably the biggest area it got adopted. And it started to minimize the problem of cost because the government paid for it. They could manage the safety of it. They could manage those types of things. It actually did very well there. The second place it did well, whether it's park tours or Lily's city tour in Chicago, right, is it was tourists in a new city or a city they're not familiar with. And it was all about helping those people immerse in the city where walking isn't practical, too far to walk, and a bus tour is too far removed, right? Where you sit back and you watch. How do you immerse them in it? Are there challenges with that? Sure. Sidewalks, safety, regulation, we won't get into all of that. But it actually got some good adoption there because these companies could buy them. A group of 5 to 10 people could go on it together, right? And you could experience it. And it was sort of a fun way to experience the city, assuming you got comfortable with the technology and the balancing part of it. So that's the who, what, hows that ended up happening. Now, I will tell you, if I go back to these two needs or these two situations, you know, as an innovator, if you think about the who and the what more, could there have been other hows that could actually have been even better at security patrol or city immersion. And you're seeing some of these continue to take off. What about just a golf cart for police, right? God, you don't have to reinvent a whole technology there. Could that have been a better how for security patrol? Maybe. Or what if you had these really interesting vehicles that could go on the regular street, but they were easy to park, quick, you could park them and you could get out of and go visit the Golden Gate Bridge or something like that. And these are both real examples, and there are others. But what I think about a lot with the Segway example is, if I think about product market fit and the who, what, how, it really makes you think about what happens and how to actually set this up. Now, I will tell you, don't feel too sorry for Segway, right? And Dean, Segway was acquired by a British businessman in 2009. Unfortunately, and somewhat ironically, a year later, he died in a Segway accident. He fell into a river falling off of a Segway. It was acquired by Ninebot, which was a Beijing-based transportation and logistics company in 2015. In 2016, they discontinued the two-wheeler version, and now they're one of the largest manufacturers of electric scooters along the way. Such irony, Joshua. And Zahir, when I think about the main issue, I think they got so focused on the how and how cool it would be to create this amazing technology, and they talked themselves into believing that it would change everything. But oftentimes in innovation, if you think you're going to solve everything for everyone, you end up solving nothing for no one. And so I would argue that if you can have a good understanding of the who and the what, it might take you in different places in the how, just like Embrace did. And it might actually take you to a different problem, or perhaps a bigger problem along the way. So that's the story of the Segway. So let's go back to my I wonder, and get ready for some questions, by the way. So be thinking about questions you want to ask as we sort of head to the end of the content, and we'll open it up in a few minutes. Can you actually get to better innovations, and can you get to them faster if you actually spend less time on the innovation itself? So those are interesting stories. Hopefully you learned a lot from the Embrace story and the Segway story, but let me make it even more real for you. This is a project that my team worked on when I was at First Data. I'll get there in a second. Sorry, I forgot this was next. What I would ask you to think about is half of the battle is solving the need the right way, the how. The other half is solving the right need for the right user. That's what we're up against. That's what we're trying to figure out, is how do we innovate on both of those things? Therefore, I would argue that you should spend nearly as much time in the who and the what as you do in the how. But most organizations spend more of their time in the how, which is fascinating. Think about it. The programs or the products or the services, most of the energy is spent in that time. So a way to sort of bring this to life, a traditional approach to a new product or a new program or a new service at an organization is you spend a little time up front defining the who and the what. Here's our target market. You do some demographics. Maybe if you're good, you do some quantitative market sizing and TAM and SAM stuff along the way. You are like, this is the problem, and you say it at a high level. And then you spend all of your energy on the how, building that, iterating the how, and that's great. And you launch it. Well, the challenge that most companies face is then you actually have to, once you get it into market, you have to pivot. You have to launch it again if you really want to get it right. Now, startups are pretty good at this. They can pivot more easily, although again, only 1 out of 10 are really successful. Larger organizations, especially when you have a brand or existing customers, they struggle to launch again. And oftentimes they aren't able to be successful in that. So what I would ask you to think about is, what if a more innovation approach or a design thinking approach, what if you were to do that, right? Imagine spending more time on the who and the what, actually less time on the how, so that you balance it. What I have seen in my career, what I have seen with other organizations who've adopted this as they do these design thinking cycles and iterations, is they will launch, right? And they get to that hockey stick of revenue or growth or whatever it is you're solving for quicker. Now, I'll also tell you that maybe you'll launch in a design thinking approach a little bit after the traditional approach, maybe. But I have to tell you, in most situations I've been a part of, I actually am able to launch the thing sooner by using the design thinking approach, as opposed to later with the traditional approach, even before I launch again. And so let me give you a quick story on that as we think about this. All right. So at First Data, we had a product called the Money Network Card. I'm not going to go super deep on this. A Money Network Card is a prepaid debit card. So it looks like a credit card, but on it is stored value, right? And we have a prepaid system that manages that. So it's not a credit card or a debit card that both come out of bank accounts or bank accounts. It comes out of a prepaid account. This is a really good product for those who are underserved or underbanked. Funnily enough, they don't think of themselves as underbanked, but lower on the socioeconomic ladder. They tend not to trust banks. And so they actually get their weekly salary deposited onto a prepaid card. So the team came to us and said, we want to build an app. And of course they came and said, hey, we could do this and we could do that and we could do this. And wouldn't it be cool if we could do that? And so we started to hand sketch what the app could be. And we thought of all the things we could put in it, right? Before we wrote a single line of code. This is a low fidelity prototype. As we started to test with users, right? And understand what matters, right? We started to get more simple, right? And we realized that you needed a really big number of your balance and you needed your bank account or the last number of transactions, right, along the way. Those were the bigger things you needed, right? And that allowed us to not worry about shopping and coupons and other things that we thought about on the left side. Long story short, we actually created the Money Network app, right? Which you can see the big number at the top, the last number of transactions. This is one of those situations where I could actually launch it sooner. The engineering team came to me and they said, hey, Scott, we're done early. Right now, we've done a lot of the design, so that helped a lot. And they said, we're done early. What else do you want us to add to this before we launch? And I said, nothing. We're very confident that we've got the right MVP, if you want to use those words, the right MVP, minimum viable product, that we should go out to market with. And we actually launched sooner than we had expected, which was amazing. And interesting enough, if you care about things like this, which I do, in the first 6 months after launch, we got a 64 net promoter, right? And if you're not familiar with net promoter, that's a world-class type of experience. This product didn't do a lot, but it did exactly what it needed to do in the right way. Said another way, the who and the what and the how were perfectly aligned. The who was these money network users who are underbanked, who don't trust banks. The what was make sure they never get denied with this card at the point of sale, because they love that card. They feel like they're part of the financial mainstream. The worst thing that could happen is if they actually get up to the point of sale and they swipe it and it gets denied. They're already nervous about money. And the other thing that they do, by the way, is when they're shopping like at a grocery store, they're actually doing the math in their head, because there's a big difference between spending $35 or $30. That's why it was so important to give them their number in the last 5 transactions that had cleared, so they could make sure they don't run out of money. And then the how was a very simple app that showed them those numbers really easily. So that's in a nutshell as I think about it. And so I really do believe you can get better innovations and faster if you actually spend less time on the innovation itself. The Money Network team, they didn't have to spend time on features that weren't going to be used. They didn't have to spend time on exploring things that were interesting ideas that an executive had. We were really clear as we iterated, as these design thinking cycles were ahead of the development cycles, we were really clear what it was. And so we were really confident coming out that we could actually do a better job. And so I didn't waste cycles, I didn't waste time, right, along the way. Or if I wasted them at low fidelity before code was written. And I used those learnings as fast as I could to then make sure that my precious engineering resources, and you could translate that to manufacturing or any other precious how resource, I made sure that was focused on exactly the right things. So that's enough of the content. We're going to do a few more minty questions because I want to hear what you think now. And then again, I'm watching Q&A. There's some good questions in there. Please add some more questions and we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about some of those. So get your questions in. So let's revisit some of our questions. What do you think? After having gone through this, do you think you actually can get better innovations if you spend less time on innovation itself? And be honest with me. You're not going to hurt my feelings at all if you say, nope, I still don't believe you, Scott, right? But think about it for your own organizations. Could you do this? And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Awesome. Keep going. What else do you think? Some unsures. Totally get it. By the way, I'm expecting at least one no, I would imagine, right? To actually help us keep us honest on this. Hey, there we go. Unsure? Great. We'll give it a few more seconds. It's a little counterintuitive, or you could argue a lot counterintuitive. But people's mental model of innovation spends so much time on the innovation itself, the how. I see many organizations think they know the who and the what. So let me be clear. It doesn't mean that teams don't spend any time on the who and the what, right? They'll put together a slide. Maybe they'll do a quick research. They'll do a little bit. What I'm talking about is much deeper empathy. I think Joshua asked the design thinking approach a little bit more. I'll use that. I'll get back to that in a second, Joshua, because I want that to really come to life. What do I really mean by who and what, and how do you do that? Awesome. Great. So yes, a few no's, unsure, but would like to try. All right. And Karmesha, totally understand, didn't answer. All good. I think it'll be interesting to compare. If I remember back, it was about 40% yes, right? There were more no's, there were some unsures. So I think that's great. Awesome. Jay, great comment. If you look at chat, this was a wonderful quote that I think is exactly right. If you ask Einstein, and I'm going to get the specifics wrong, but I think Jay did it well. Einstein said he would spend 55 minutes of 60 minutes framing the problem, understanding the problem, and then 5 minutes solving it. I think it's exactly right. That's what we're talking about. But yet with so much innovation, because we're humans, we want to solve. All right, good. Let's do one more of these. Now, how would you spend your time, right? If you have 100 points, what percent would you dedicate against the who? What percent against the what percent about the how? Joshua, let me come back to your question. When I'm talking about the who and the what, some of the techniques that you use, you get out into the field, right? You watch what people do, right? What they do and what they say is often different. You ask them really open-ended questions. Tell me about the last time you immersed in a new city, and you listen. You listen to understand, not listen to solve. That's empathy, right? In a nutshell. And that's what you're trying to do. And then you're coming up with things around, I think the problem could be this, or the problem could be that. And you're spending time as a team just thinking about the need space, the who and the what. You're putting that wonderful horsepower of great cross-functional teams to work on defining the problem. Awesome. So I see more what, I think, than we had before. A little more how, a little more who, a little less how. I think someone said it well. You've got to have all of these. Let's be clear, right? You've got to have all of these along the way. But how do you balance them? And what I want you to take away from this is that who and the what often gets neglected. Okay, so as we move into Q&A, and I'm watching chat, so you guys are doing great. Let me do one more question that I'm just going to leave up. And the way I want to frame this is what I have learned throughout my time is that the goal when you learn some insight in a webinar or a course, the way I've seen most people be successful is not by getting back to their day job and going big and doing everything the speaker or the course said. It's actually by going small. And what small experiment could you run in the next week or so to actually create the snowball rolling down the hill to create change? So what I would love you to think about as we go through the next 10 minutes or so is what could you do at your organization to try a little bit more who and what? All right. And I would love for you to put it in the Menti, and we're just going to keep those running as we go. All right. Focused on the user. And I would actually encourage you guys, get as specific as you can. I'm going to call a customer next week and ask something, right? You get the idea. So think about what you could do. All right. So let me get back to some of the questions that have been asked, which was great. Let me jump back to one of the first that was asked, which is where's the why in this whole thing? It's great to use who, what, and how. Where's the why? Great question. If you've ever seen Simon Sinek's Start With Why, I'm a huge fan of that. But I would argue you've got to start with why and end with why, right? Why are you doing this? Why did the Embrace team want to go after that? They wanted to solve the infant mortality, right, problem. They got passionate about that. So I would argue that Embrace team really started with why. And I think that's great. Who are you thinking about? What's the problem space? What's the territory that you want to make the world a better place? You want to improve the customer's life. So I'm a big fan of starting with why, but why isn't enough, right? And by the way, your why might need to change as well. That's why I start with why and end with why, because as I do the who, what, and how iterations, I might end up with a different why. Embrace infant mortality was part of their why, but they thought it was about incubators in the clinics. Their why became about those moms with premature babies and solving for them. So I think why is a really important part of this. I would start with it. I would end on this. Hopefully that helps. Joshua, you talked about design thinking a little bit, and I hit a little bit of that, but let me sort of go a little deeper on that. We talked about who, what, how. Design thinking, I think of as 5 steps that I showed you, right? It starts with empathy and define. Empathy, understand the user better than they know themselves. Define, understand that need that their problem is solved. What's their end goal? What's the job to be done, if you're familiar with that? Those two are squarely in the need space and in the who and the what. Prototype, ideate and prototype are clearly in the solution space. They're around the how. You ideate different ideas and solutions, and you prototype those to bring it to life. The 5th step is test. And test sits halfway in between need and solution. You're testing the who and the what, you're testing the how, and you're iterating over and over and over again. So in a nutshell, that's how I think about design thinking, sort of related to this. And you're doing both of those at the same time. What people often think about with innovation is they think about iterating the how, right? What I'm encouraging my teams to do is to iterate the who and the what. And you're iterating all of these at the same time until you have that product market fit of the who, the what, and the how. That's related, Kevin, to your question around, can you touch on waterfall versus iterative? Great question. Hopefully you can sort of hear my bias on iterative, right? I actually think you can't get to the great outcomes without iterating. I personally am not good enough to just see it and to do it. Someone like a Steve Jobs was. I'm not Steve Jobs. I have to work much harder at it. So at least in the design thinking early work, I'm iterating like crazy. Now, I have worked with teams that are iterative agile, right? And what we try to do is, without geeking out too much, is we try to do dual track agile, where our design thinking cycles are a little bit ahead of our dev cycles. And so we're agile together. That's my favorite situation. But even if you have a waterfall development shop, great. Do the iterations before a single line of code is written to figure this out. Use that prototyping to make it happen. And then you're better able to then hand it off and define the requirements to a waterfall team. And then because you've defined it so well, the waterfall team can generally move faster. So it can work with both, without a doubt. I happen to be a fan of more iterative and the learnings along the way, but that can really help you along the way. Melody. Melody, you just hit on something that I think is really key, which isn't a huge part of what we've been talking about, right? But, you've got to be really clear who your user is. And I would say 2 things. Melody shares a story that this all-male engineering team was working on a product utilized by women, right? Now, I will tell you, that can work as long as people flip their perspective to the user. So if they have lots of conversations around, oh, let me tell you about Sarah, who I met, oh, and Melody, who I met, let me tell you, they can bring that in, though I will tell you what gets to a better answer is a diverse team. Now, I also like diverse team across gender, across race, across years of experience. I love diverse teams. I also, though, wouldn't stack the whole team with women, because one of the hardest things to do in this mindset of design thinking is acknowledging you are not the user. Your job is to solve for someone else, not for yourself. And that's a really hard thing to develop. Awesome. So let's do a couple of other questions, and we'll sort of use the next 5 minutes. And then I'm also looking at the slide we've got. I love reassess the content pages of the website. I think that's an awesome one. And it's very specific, right? Now that I've got my who and my what lens, let me evaluate it that way. And of course, you still need the how lens. And I'll be interested to hear what you have. it's interesting. One of the first questions I ask when people come to me with an idea, because they most often launch into, here's the idea. I often ask, wait, who are you solving for and what are their needs? And they sort of skip that part to some degree. It's there, it's implicit in their head. How do we make this explicit? And then I love a few of the things around ask questions. Absolutely, ask questions, ask open-ended questions along the way. I think that's all great. All right, so let me take a few more questions. So awesome. So Keith asked about, we're all interpreting this differently. That gets to really two things I would share. Number one is the thing I've learned the most as you're building innovation capability in a person or a team or an organization is get clear on language. What do you even mean by the word innovation? That was a great question that was asked earlier. What do you mean by agile? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Right? And it's funny because we have this human relationship thing where we don't want to look dumb. We want to look like we know what people are talking about, but people often hide behind these big words, right? I work in the payments ecosystem. Deluxe is a payments company. And man, we could talk all day long about crypto, real-time payments, blockchain, all of these things that are out there. Sometimes we play payments bingo, by the way. But by really focusing on clean and simple language, that's huge. So Keith, the first part of your answer is getting clear on language is huge. Hopefully by these three stories, I helped you think about how I think about those words, who you're solving for, what needs or problems or jobs you're solving, and how you actually solve them. But the key that matters as you think about bringing this back is getting people aligned to the language, whether it's my language or someone else's language. If you don't get them aligned on the language, you're never really going to get the alignment on the who, the what, and the how on the real things that you're trying to do. Great question. Maybe we'll take one more, or if there's more questions to go. I think I'm just scanning through, doing this real time. So let me just make sure. Yeah, awesome. I think I've got many. Oh, I get some more. That's awesome. So let me hit one more. And Raymond asked this question of, how do you design around growth associated with business ecosystems? And Raymond, there's a lot of big words in there. I think I know what you're getting at. So let me give you a couple thoughts. It's wonderful to create a simple who, what, how, right? You have one user, you have one need, and you have one product or solution. The world is not that simple, right? One level up, think about, I sort of gave a couple B2C examples, business to consumer examples. Think about a B2B2C type of example. In that case, you need multiple who, what, hows. You need the who, what, how for that end customer. You need the who, what, how for that intermediary who's going to sell through or who you go through along the way, right? As you get into ecosystems, it's even more complicated, right? The payments ecosystem, for example, has a combination of consumers, I'll simplify, consumers who use cards, small businesses or merchants who take cards, a merchant acquirer, an issuing bank, right? An issuing processor, an issuing bank. As you're involved in ecosystems, I would argue you have to do the same thing. You just have more who, what, hows than the simple examples I've done. And I've done this at multiple places. So that's what I would think about as you think about ecosystems along the way is, again, make sure you're clear. Where most organizations and most teams get stuck is they mix users, right? There's one who, there's one what, there's one how. In the real world, they're less. But this language can help you tease it apart. And so sometimes I'll have my teams do a who, what, how exercise where we'll get on a whiteboard and we'll do who, what, how across left to right. And then we just come up with all the who, what, how combinations just to make sense of an existing situation, an existing product, an existing ecosystem along the way. So let me sort of head towards wrapping up. Raymond, great, great, thank you for that. Let me hit that, that's great. To learn more about design thinking, a couple things. There's some really good books out there. I'm a big fan of a book called Creative Confidence by David and Tom Kelly, who founded IDEO. They also founded the D School. So that's a really good one. Change by Design is another one that I like by Tim Brown. It really brings to life what IDEO specifically has done using some of these things. I think that's great. But let me give you something even more close to home, right? Which is we actually have a couple courses coming up at Emory that I teach around innovation, right? We actually have one next Thursday, Friday. So if you're interested, I'd love to have you next Thursday, Friday, where we actually teach design thinking for business innovation. We spend 2 days not just talking about case studies, but actually doing it. And then we spend the latter half of the second day, how do you apply it back to your world? Because as much as I'm excited to teach you things or to speak, I get more excited about the things you are going to do. So if you're interested in that, you can scan the QR code or go to Emory's website in the executive education world. That's great. We also have something around disrupting your business strategy, where we're taking the tools of innovation and we're trying to challenge the organization's strategy and even the organization's mission. We talked about the why. Oftentimes the why is set in stone. In today's world, Nicola talked about at the beginning, we've got to constantly change. So I've been fascinated about how can you take these tools of innovation of design thinking and apply them to other areas. And this is one we're doing with corporate strategy or organizational strategy. Have some amazing speakers coming in. Scan that QR code. Would love to have you as well. Those are just some of the things that we get excited as at Emory of how do we not just, get you excited about some of the stories, but how do you build the skills and make this happen at your own organizations and teams? So with that, Pam, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. It is always so much fun having you join us for Business Over Breakfast, and especially getting to have you in the classroom with us, because students always take away so much. Your stories help all of these ideas come to life, and I always learn new ones each time I get to hear from you. So we want to signal really quickly what's coming up next. We had a quick changeover, so we're waiting to confirm our topic for October the 20th. But coming up in November, we have some of those topics scheduled. So stay tuned to hear more about October the 20th. In November, we have a session coming up on the leadership superpowers, which is how to be equipped to really lead effectively in this volatile, uncertain world that we're living in. We'll have a session on rethinking your career journey. And coming up in December, we have a couple of topics that we think we're ready to confirm. So come join us on October the 20th to hear more about what's coming ahead. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and look forward to seeing you on the first and third Thursday each month. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Scott.
Thanks all.